Welcome. Welcome to Language at Carroll. It's actually the first talk in our speaker series. We have 5 additional talks coming up. We generally present the last Thursday of each month. Just make sure you take a look at the Thursday update just to know what's coming up. We do record these. Should you want to watch later, should you want to share it with anyone else, we will make these available in the Thursday update. I'm here with my colleague, Allison West, who is the division head for the middle school, who's going to speak about the language program here at Carroll. So Allison, we'll just give it another few seconds to get us started. For those of you who might have questions, we have disabled the chat, but we do have the Q&A button on. The program should run until about 7:45, 7:50, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. Should we not get to your questions, we will make sure to email you and follow up. So just go ahead and use that Q&A button. I'll be monitoring that and asking Allison some of your questions at the end of the presentation. So tonight I'm here again with Allison West, our division head for the middle school, who's going to help you understand why the program at Carroll works for our students, for your child, for the child you're here to learn more about our program about. Helping you understand why reading is so complicated. It's one of those things that some of us learned with great ease and automaticity, and for others it is so hard. But when Allison breaks it down, it makes you wonder how anyone could possibly learn to read. Then Allison is going to go into how we use data to inform instruction, how prescriptive and diagnostic we are with this data. And just as a warning, it's going to look very complicated, but Allison's going to break it down for us and help you understand how our educators use this information. And finally, she's going to spend some time talking about the Orton-Gillingham principles. So, Allison West, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Good evening, everyone, and I'm really happy to be here with you all tonight on this balmy evening. Close to 80 today. I'm not exactly sure how that happened. So my goal for tonight, for you all, is to be able to close your computers and have a slightly better understanding of why, as Stacy mentioned, the language program works here at Carroll. And I hope that you better understand the ways in which we are different than other schools, how our fully immersive program results in effective results. And I'm going to do that through pictures, some examples, some videos, and data that I hope will provide you with some of that evidence. And spoiler alert, I'm actually going to start with the answer and then sort of go back and explain. So my belief is that our language program here works so beautifully for 3 primary reasons. First and foremost, we have a school-wide dedication to ensure that Orton-Gillingham principles are everywhere. They guide us in our development of lessons. They guide us in how we deliver instruction, how we provide reminders at recess, and how we think about even things like field trips and special days. And a lot of us think of Orton-Gillingham as just reading, and it is a phenomenal approach to teach students how to read and spell. But it's not just that. And next, the other point here is we quite possibly are obsessed with using data to inspire the decisions that we make. The data that we collect helps us design student schedules. As you may already know, we have homogeneous ELA classes. We have really targeted focus area classes, as well as additional opportunities in our flex blocks to provide some additional support as needed. And this data that we collect helps us know how and what to teach. This data helps us track their growth. It helps us to pinpoint those lagging skills that we need to be paying close attention to. And finally, why does our language program work so well? It's the educators. And this might possibly be the most important factor. I feel pretty confident saying that we have some of the most dedicated, highly trained, and compassionate educators I have met. I am not exaggerating. I have been very fortunate to travel the country, visiting schools, collaborating with lots of educators who work with students like ours. And I have to say, the educators who choose to stay at Carroll do so because they have a really deep passion and appreciation for our kids. And they truly make the choice to dedicate their career to becoming the most skilled educator of students with dyslexia. So let's move on so I can give a few little examples on that'll help highlight some of those three buckets. This may be an image that is familiar to some of you. Dr. Hollis Scarborough originally published this image of the reading rope in an article titled Connecting Early Language and Literacy to Later Reading Disabilities, Evidence, Theory, and Practice. And this was put out in 2001 to explain how complex the process of reading is. And as you can see, there are many discrete skills that all need to come together for a student to become a skilled reader. Now, like we do with most things at Carroll, we have Carrollized this rope, and we have added cognitive skills, which you can see represented in the purple below. Now, most folks often think of the skills that are in the middle and those red strands. Think about Orton Gillingham. And it is true that phonological awareness, decoding, and sight word recognition are all heavily focused on during an Orton Gillingham lesson. However, it's really important to understand that there are other essential strands that need to be strengthened in order for people to become skilled readers. And frankly, the gifts that we've received in the area of neuroscience and research have really helped us understand the critical role that certain cognitive skills play as we are really leaning into developing our students' language skills. So we have included also here, Jen, if you double click, an additional thread to represent the importance of strengthening our students' social and emotional skills and ensuring a true sense of belonging. And you're going to hear a bit more about this, about this feeling, this sense of belonging and the importance of social emotional skills as I discuss with you the principles of Orton Gillingham, because it is an important principle embedded in that approach. The fact of the matter is, students simply cannot learn if they do not feel a sense of safety and belonging. In other words, none of these threads that are weaving together, the blue, the red, the purple, can come together without strong social emotional functioning and a true sense of belonging. So you might be asking, why is our language program so strong? It's because we pay attention to each and every one of these threads. And we actually do it all day. We're not doing it in an isolated pull-out session. We're not doing it in an isolated push-in session that is dictated by an IEP service delivery grid. We are paying attention to these strands all day long, from the time a student is dropped off at Carroll to the time they are picked up, through all of their classes and even at recess. As we move on, to continue with this wonderful metaphor of a rope, our job is really to find those weak frayed strands in order to strengthen them. And for us, it can often be easy to see or hear when a student's reading rope is not strong. They may be disfluent or have low stamina for reading, and we may find that their comprehension skills as a result are lagging. The key here is that we must use a combination of leveraging their strengths while also designing targeted instruction that focuses on building those lagging skills. And so as we move on, I'm going to start off by taking you on a little data journey. And I'm going to show you how we use all of this data that we collect on a regular basis to inspire our understanding of a student's needs and strengths in order to make the best decisions for programming. And I know that Stacy Daniels is panicking a little bit at how much data I'm about to show on these screens. And my purpose is not to overwhelm you with this, but it is to show you just how how important it is for us to be using this data to inspire the choices that we're making every day. So here we have a current 7th grader who actually started in the 3rd grade. And we can see on the left here, these are reading fluency scores. And you'll notice that the rainbow lines are percentile, and they help us understand where a student's oral reading fluency score falls within a national percentile rank. And you can see this student from 3rd through 4th through 5th grade really stayed below that 10th percentile line, that red line. And we can see that coming into 6th grade, there was a big increase. There was a jump. And the chart on the right is one that shows words correct per minute. It shows the accuracy and it shows the percentile. And I'm not exactly sure why that box is on the screen, but it's covering up a little bit here. And if, Jen, if you click, what is most impressive here on this chart on the right is that when I'm looking at this data, I can see that his accuracy scores from 4th through 6th grade really started to climb. And so that's when we begin to ask ourselves, which of those threads on that rope need the most attention? And we continue to dig. And as we continue to dig, we see here that this is a child who mastered the first 1,000 sight words, a feat that correlates with that jump in his fluency score. And here's a fun fact about sight word development. There is a lot of research that supports as students develop their sight word automaticity, we will then begin to see really nice trajectory in their oral reading fluency progress. And we can see here that around the time that this student demonstrated mastery on those first 1,000 sight words, that's when we really started to see this jump in oral reading fluency. We then look, if you click again, Jen, at his decoding scores. And this chart shows up at the top of the rows, it says decode L1, L2, L3, L4, and there's dates on the side that note when that data was collected. Orton Gillingham has 4 levels of curriculum. And what this chart is telling me when I'm looking at it is in 6th grade and now as the first round of 7th grade, this student has showed mastery of levels 1 and 2. And this is a wonderful point of progress in decoding, which shows that this is a student who's really ready to develop his morphological awareness skills at a higher level. So this is informing his tutor just how to plan and the goals to set in order to maximize progress. So far, we can see while his oral reading fluency is showing excellent growth, he is continuing to require targeted instruction in levels 3 and 4 of decoding, with also a continued focus on automaticity. Now, as part of this process, the next question we would wonder is how is this impacting his reading comprehension? And if you click with the next slide, you're going to see that we also use a tool called Track My Progress that helps us monitor progress for ELA skills. In particular, we're looking at silent reading comprehension. And when we look at this chart, these bar graphs, we can see that, again, as this child has gained mastery in decoding of levels 1 and 2, and his oral reading fluency began to show better accuracy and speed, we can also see an increase in silent reading comprehension scores. And this is important because it confirms for us that the challenges that this child is facing are not a comprehension deficit, but truly this is helping us understand that we need to focus on the automaticity and the fluency of reading because we know that comprehension is there. So now I want to know how to best tackle this instruction. And the question that we ask ourselves is Is there a cognitive pathway that could use some extra attention? And that is there additional targeted instruction that we could put in place for this student? And the next slide is going to show us just that. The next slide, we can see that there are the 4 cognitive pathways that we track at Carroll, including reaction time, processing speed, an aspect of executive functioning called shifting attention, and working memory. And we track these areas because we know these are the most common cognitive pathways that our children with dyslexia or language-based learning differences tend to struggle with. Now, you may be noticing right off the bat that each of these charts, and I will just add that the students' data are the blue dots with the lines. You may be noticing that there is variability, kind of like the Swiss Alps, some ups, some downs. And it's really a beautifully complex profile. This is also just consistent with being human. We have some days that are better than others. So as we are looking at this data, we are looking for the trend line over time. We can note here that this student's data shows growth moving in a positive direction in processing speed. So visual processing speed is an area of strength. This area of executive functioning that we refer to as shifting attention is also moving in a really great direction. And working memory, again, although some variability, the trend is moving in a really positive way. His reaction time data, however, does not have that same growth pattern. And if you click, Jen, it will highlight here. Now, I also know in 5th grade, this child completed a targeted cognitive intervention program that combined reaction time with an oral reading fluency intervention. And in 6th grade, Jen, if you could click in 6th grade, he focused on processing speed. And so that blue bar, that blue column that the arrow is pointing to indicates that intervention time. And we can see that there's some really wonderful movement that aligns with that targeted cognitive intervention. So again, this is a seed of the data that is showing us the interventions that we have selected in this moment are yielding positive results. This tells me that the more that we can help this child build reaction time skills in both speed and accuracy, and the more we can continue to target reading instruction to help him build automaticity, so those 2 things, he is going to have the best chances at continuing to progress in impressive ways. So I hope this is showing you a little bit that it's not just a matter of, oh, this student needs to work on fluency. There's so much more involved. And as I'm sure Stacy is cringing because that was a lot of data, a lot of charts, I share the Carroll Skills Radar with you because all of that data is amazing and our teachers have access to all of that data and they're using it on a regular basis. But when we need a really quick reference, our teachers are able to access this Skills Radar. And any teacher at any time is able to pull this up for their class. And the Skills Radar is a snapshot. It's just a single snapshot of the most recent academic and cognitive data for one student at a time. And as the numbers at the end of each pie are the percentiles, nationally normed percentiles. And you can see that as the piece of pie grows out toward the edge of the circle, that shows growth in an area. And you can see this child has many areas of strength. Academic data is collected as part of our periodic progress monitoring, and the cognitive data comes from our set of cognitive assessments that we administer, again, over several times a year. So any teacher is able to access this skills radar to identify those frayed threads, to help them understand how can I best support this child. So if a science teacher, for example, is preparing to pull together some texts to introduce the water cycle, that science teacher will have access to the skills radar of the students in their classes to be able to inform how to differentiate that instruction.
Allison? I have a quick
Yes.
question that's a little timely. We had a parent question that was wondering if it's typical for accuracy to be variable, to go up and down over time.
It is. And in fact, what I didn't point out is we will sometimes see summer slide. So chances are when you were noticing some of that variability, it was the variability between the spring score and the fall score. It is not uncommon when students are still working on developing their decoding skills for their fluency to drop a bit because they're being introduced to a more advanced text every year. Very good question.
Thank you. And the cringiness is, it's all good. It's all good. Those charts are beautiful. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're going to move on from the charts for a little bit. And I didn't want you to think that I'm only thinking about reading, because writing is an important part of language as well, and literacy acquisition. And we have worked with Joan Sedita in the past. She is an expert in the field. And in 2019, Joan adapted to create the writing rope. And just as we consider all of the complexities that go into reading development, we are also paying very close attention to the development of written language skills. We are analyzing writing samples and curriculum-based assessments in order to define the strengths and the weaknesses in order to develop the meaningful goals for instruction. And I'm going to show you now a few examples of writing samples, actual student writing samples that have been used to create classroom goals, to create individual goals, to help students reflect and target instruction. And so this next slide shows our first student. And this is a fall curriculum-based assessment in the 6th grade. And this sample shows that this student was asked if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? And this sample shows a student who has a very clear understanding of paragraph structure. There are transition words and phrases. There are topic and concluding sentences, along with details that add more information and explanation. Most of the sentences are complete, although maybe a couple fragments mixed in there. And I can also add that the goal areas are really centered around sentence expansion, really in advancing the vocabulary and word choice, including more sophisticated language. The variety of sentence structure is definitely a goal area, and evaluating those sentences to make sure they're a complete thought. If we move to the next slide, you can see that by the spring, this very same student worked very hard to generate more writing in the same exact time period, I should say. She has been working on essay development at this point, and you can see that this student has a clear thesis statement and a concluding statement. And the goal moving forward as she heads into 7th grade is to be working on those intro and concluding paragraphs. What you'll see if you're skimming through here, you might be noticing that there are definitely attempts to use more sophisticated word choices. I sense the use of a thesaurus here, where instead of saying bad or not good, she's using words like inferior, dreadful, deficient. And the student clearly has worked on using evidence and facts from a text to support their claim. So again, in the fall, the teacher was able to analyze that class's writing samples in order to develop really clear, specific goals to guide instruction throughout the course of the year. Our next sample looks at some lower school writing. And we can see in this process paragraph curriculum-based assessment, we have a fall and a spring CBA. And you can see here that this student worked really hard over the course of the year to learn about paragraph structure, to use transition words, and to write and complete sentences. What started off is a sort of bulleted list in the fall has really developed into a more cohesive paragraph. Moving on in 4th grade, Students are also working on descriptive paragraphs. And you can see here in a similar trajectory, this student worked really hard to learn about paragraph structure again. They're using more transition words, they're writing incomplete sentences, and they're actually responding to the prompt. If you'll note on the fall, instead of describing their favorite season, they just simply added what they liked about summer, what they liked about winter. Whereas in the spring, it's a much more focused writing piece where they're talking just about the season of winter. So again, our teachers are taking all of these writing samples in order to target instruction in really meaningful ways. Next up, I'm going to shift gears a little bit to share with you how Orton Gillingham is really more than just an approach used in tutorial. It truly is everywhere. And Orton Gillingham offers educators a set of research-proven principles that at Carroll guide us in developing and delivering effective instruction every day. These guiding principles are infused in every aspect of the day, from, of course, in Orton Gillingham tutorial, and also in math class, and also in how we provide instructions and redirections at even recess or lunch. And these principles, I'm going to break down and show you really specific examples. Now, thinking about language development, if you were to, on the side here, Google language development or literacy development, you will find a treasure trove of images and articles. But the most important point that I would like for you to take away here is that all of those resources are going to point out that language or literacy development is a developmental process that requires the acquisition of specific skills in a particular progression. And some of that is shown here in these pyramids. And all of these blocks are essential. These are sort of examples of the writing rope and the reading rope in the form of pyramid. All of these are essential if we want students to become skilled readers and writers. And the research tells us that, in fact, approaches and principles that can guide us in designing effective and meaningful instruction will honor that developmental approach. And that is what the OG principles offer us. And I know we're often asked about what grade level is my student at? Will my student be able to read that 4th grade level book? Or is this 7th grade book something my child can read? Or heading off to 9th grade, is this biology text going to be accessible? And our challenge and our opportunity is we need to get those kids to read at grade level, knowing that there is a very clear developmental process that needs to be addressed. And at Carroll, all the teachers are helping students develop these necessary skills. And I'm going to illustrate now how these OG principles are infused throughout the day in order to create a fully immersive experience. And it can feel quite different from what many students experienced in a traditional pull-out or push-in model that provided that instruction during pockets of time. Instead, it's a complete wraparound approach. And I will just say that this is going to be an overview, just a snapshot of examples, and I'm going to take you through them. But I do encourage you to ask your child's teachers how they are infusing these OG principles into their day. All right. The first principle I'm going to talk about is the principle of being diagnostic and prescriptive. And teachers who employ a diagnostic and prescriptive approach are designing instruction that is a dynamic, continuous, and adaptable monitoring of student work. We are diagnosing the challenge and we are prescribing the intervention. In other words, our curriculum is not a plug and play. Our science teachers, our history teachers, our language teachers, our math teachers do not have a scripted curriculum that they can use to guide them. Every day they are taking the work samples, the discussions, the students' verbal responses in class, and using that to inform the next day's lesson. A diagnostic and prescriptive teacher is providing feedback. And what's important to know about what makes Carroll unique here is that there are so many eyes on all of these students. This diagnostic and prescriptive approach is not just falling in the hands of individual educators, but it includes coaches, it includes department heads, it includes our graduate interns, all of these heads working together, all of these eyes observing and feeding into action plans that are helping design the best possible program. This next slide shows an example of a diagnostic and prescriptive task in a science class, where after learning about all of this beautiful vocabulary related to the water cycle, students were then asked to label a visual. And from there, the teacher was able to determine whether or not more time was needed to practice this vocabulary, or if students were ready to move on to the next task. And something as simple as this is going to provide a tremendous amount of information that is going to guide the student, that guide the teacher in the pacing of the class, in the spiraling back that is needed, and maybe some in additional individual support for students who need that repetition. The next principle we're going to cover talks about being individualized. And all of the educators at Carroll really have a lens through which they are individualizing for every student. I'm sure by now you've heard the phrase, give each child what they most need. And this principle really speaks to that. Although not every student is in a one-on-one class for every single block, rest assured that each educator is thinking about individual students when they are designing lessons and units. And lessons are taking into consideration students' learning profiles, culture, identity, and interests. You'll see here in these images on the top, this came from an 8th grade science class where students needed to demonstrate their understanding of the heart, the structure of the heart. And they were allowed an opportunity to be creative in doing so. Students were able to select a manner that felt easy for them to be able to communicate their knowledge. Down below, you'll see a group of 4 students working on a task where they're practicing morphology. They're matching up roots and meanings, and they're building words and pulling words apart. And based on how they work together in that task, you'll see there's an individual student here now working on splitting up a word containing 2 different morphemes that she was struggling with in that task. So again, individualizing instruction based on that diagnostic and prescriptive approach. On this next slide, we can see that the student on the left is using a color-coded graphic organizer during a writing task. And that is to help this student be able to generate and organize ideas in a way that is helpful for him. As students progress through the years, and in particular in middle school and in the upper school, we have a variety of graphic organizers that students have been exposed to and have learned. And at a certain point, we begin to work with students to identify the specific organizers and resources that are working best for them. And then it becomes part of their own personal toolkit. On the right here, we'll see this lower school friend using their own personal get ready, do, done tool, which is a visual structure that is helping him independently complete a task with a lot of consistency and predictability. Our next principle that we're going to explore a little bit here is the language-based and alphabetic phonetic principle. And this principle tells us that there is a logic to language. This principle also encourages students to be strategic, to really look for the patterns. For those of us who just learned how to read naturally, and I include myself in that. When I was trained to be an Orton Gillingham practitioner, I was stunned at all of the patterns and the predictable nature of the language. It doesn't come naturally to our students. We need to be, again, direct and explicit in showing this to them. Up top, this picture up here, this is images that are helping students understand that there are syllable division patterns that guide us in decoding words. We are very specific about teaching all of the elements to help students break words apart. Our teachers use word study to draw conclusions about generalizations and spelling rules. We're asking students all the time to recognize patterns, and not just in an ELA class or a language tutorial, but we're also doing that in math. Math vocabulary a lot of that comes from Latin and Greek morphemes. And so our math teachers are even able to employ a lot of the elements of this principle. This principle also guides us in making sure we are beginning at the simplest level and then progressing through complex word and text structures. And on this next slide, I have a little question for you all. And before, Jen, you click on the next click, I want you to think about how many ways there are to make the long A sound. All right, Jen, let's see it. I'm curious to know how many of you knew that there were 8 ways. This is a principle that tells us we need to be explaining all of these details of the English language to our students explicitly. If you click again, Jen, what we can see here is another generalization. So in this generalization, the CH and TCH letter patterns both make the same sound, ch. And for our students, it's important that we directly teach them the spelling generalization for when to spell with the ch sound. And believe it or not, there is a rule. TCH always comes after a short vowel sound. CH comes either at the beginning of the word or when followed by a consonant or an R control. And these are those language-based alphabetic phonetic skills that are really essential for our students to learn and understand. After they've begun to learn some of these fundamental skills, we can then move on to morphology. And Jen, if you click on the next image, we then move students to a place where they're exploring Latin and Greek roots and prefixes and suffixes, and they're beginning to build words that are far more sophisticated than when working on some of these lower concepts. When we move on to the next, I nearly forgot. This is a wonderful video from our lower school, and this is sort of melding a couple different principles, and you might be noticing that some principles are working together in some of these examples. But here we have a student who is working on building their automaticity with blends.
The word is bring. So what's the blend? Bring.
B-R.
Mm-hmm.
I-N-G.
What's the word?
Bring.
Bring. Is that a family word?
Yes.
Awesome.
So there you have a student who, again, is working on some of those foundational concepts in order to be able to move towards the more complex patterns of the English language. Our next principle, simultaneous multisensory. Simultaneous multisensory helps us remember the importance of bringing together the senses. That is visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic, and making sure that as we are developing lessons, whether that's in art class, whether that's in Bounders, whether that's in math, ELA, science, all of the classes, that we are bringing in opportunities for that multisensory experience. Because we know that the more senses we can bring together, the better the opportunity for students to commit that new learning into long-term memory in order to retrieve it. And the next slide shows us a student using multisensory strategies to recall some short vowel sounds.
A syllable is a word or part of a word with one vowel sound.
Excellent. Okay. Again, now choose another one. What else would you like?
I would like a long vowel.
You would like a long vowel. What is a long vowel?
It's a vowel that it's like it makes a long. It's like it makes a loud. It just makes it sound like there's something like you used to say VCE or something, and it makes the vowel say its name.
Makes the vowel say its name. Perfect. Good job. All right. Next.
A short vowel.
Short vowel. Short vowel. What's a short vowel?
It's a vowel that a consonant is blocking the vowel, so it can't say its name. So it says, so it's like.
Okay. All right. Okay. What does an A sound like when it's a short vowel? What does an I sound like? Okay. And how about an O? And then U? Okay. All right.
Hopefully what you noticed there is that student was actually using some of the body kinesthetic in addition to the auditory cues to recall and remember those short vowel sounds. Our next slide shows a slightly older student who is using some multisensory strategies, again, in that bodily kinesthetic realm, to recall the meanings of learned morphemes or Latin roots.
Jack to throw, port to carry, trap to pull, struck to build, script to write, spick to see, duck deuce to lead, bring or take, pal push to push, dick to say, speak or proclaim, fict fi to make.
That's great. And the other piece I just wanted to mention as it relates to this, the multisensory instruction piece, is motor memory actually is it helps us with the longest and strongest memory. So anytime we can involve motor and bodily and kinesthetic, that is really effective. And our students tend to take in the most visually. And so oftentimes the visual component is, again, it's a really essential part of making sure that a student who is learning something new is going to be able to encode it properly to then be able to use it. The next slide shows, again, just some more examples of this commitment to multisensory instruction. Our math program uses a tremendous number of visual models, many rich manipulatives to help students think and reason and problem solve. Here are some examples of our 8th grade science classes. They're building joints in the Fab Lab, doing some dissections, as you can see. That's sometimes my favorite to pop in and watch. And the student on the top right here is building automaticity and awareness in geography by piecing together elements of a map. The makerspace for us is a really terrific space where students can make their thinking visual. And so we like to make sure that we offer as many opportunities as possible to get students into those spaces. Our next principle, number 5, informs us that direct and explicit instruction with opportunities for discovery are really key. And this principle reminds us that setting routines up for students really help set them up for success. They help contribute students to developing a mindset for learning. These clear expectations are essential for our students. It helps them come in, get ready to learn. And with this direct and explicit instruction, we can move from scaffolded instruction to greater independence. And you can see on the right here, this is a graphic organizer that students use when they are learning how to write a paragraph. That's okay, Jen. We can move to the next slide, which shows us the model of gradual release. And when we talk about direct and explicit instruction, this is a perfect illustration of that. And this is, if we look at the teacher responsibility on the left, moving over to student responsibility on the right, what this model of gradual release tells us is that at first, the teacher takes the responsibility of focused instruction. The teacher is modeling what they want the students to be able to do. It's the I do it phase, the teacher being the I. We then move to the we do it phase, and this is also often referred to as guided instruction, where the teacher is continuing to model and set an example while the students are also doing the task, whatever that task may be. And we then move to the you do it together. And this is where the collaborative learning takes place. This is where students are working together. If it's a paired tutorial or a trio tutorial, the students are working with words together. They're exploring the Orton-Gillingham concept, or they're working on the math vocabulary or problem solving together. And finally, and I will point out here that this collaborative learning step is often an excellent opportunity for our teachers to do that, the informal data collection. We're constantly walking around, we're listening, we're checking in, we're making sure that students are understanding what they're doing, they do not have any questions, or they don't need further instruction. And then finally, this process ends with the independent learning, the you do it alone. And this is where we'll perhaps assign something for homework to see how a student might be able to complete something on their own. It may be the do now task tomorrow. It might be the exit ticket. And again, another opportunity for a teacher to be using and gathering data to inform where they go next. Continuing with this principle, some more pictures to sort of illustrate this direct, explicit with discovery phase. Excuse me. We will often have partners taking a learning walk through a textbook, for example, to identify features together. We have teachers who will be providing that direct, explicit instruction in how to ask questions in history before reading a text. Our scientific investigation process with all the different variables is something that our teachers have to dedicate quite a bit of time being really direct and explicit in teaching. And we'll often see outside whole grade circle ups to review upcoming events, model expectations. I will find myself at the lower school out at the recess area where teachers are giving really direct and explicit instructions in how to climb up the climbing wall or navigate the recess space. And so it truly is, this direct, explicit instruction truly is found throughout the day. Moving on to our next principle, the structured, sequential, and cumulative, but also flexible principle. And this principle is key because it again helps us remember that studying and learning the structure of language in all of our classes is really essential. And in order for students to become skilled readers and writers, they need to know all of the different mechanisms required for learning the language, learning the English language. The morphology and vocabulary instruction that is tied to so many content areas, all of those science and history words that we're navigating with students contain those morphemes, contain those Latin and Greek roots. And we're so fortunate that our teachers are using these principles in order to be direct and explicit in teaching them. This principle also reminds us of the importance of spiraling back to reinforce previously taught skills. As one of you pointed out and asked the question, like, oh, does the accuracy of oral reading tend to fluctuate? We have to spiral back and reinforce skills. As you saw in some of the variability of some of those charts, our students are beautifully complex and beautifully variable. And so spiraling back and reinforcing those previously learned skills, which is part of this principle, is one of the very reasons why our language instruction is so effective. Moving on, we can see some additional examples here where we are teaching the structures of the English language inside and outside. You saw that video of the student getting outside before. Here, these students are also on the top left, outside, writing words, identifying different syllable types, dividing words using different syllable patterns. We are reinforcing those patterns within the English language. They're up on the wall. There's visually everywhere. We're discussing word spectrums and digging into layers of meaning, and we're learning and practicing using specific language. The next slide actually shows us a little bit about these word spectrums, and this is a task that is really important because it helps students understand the shades of meaning. And this not only helps support the reading process, but also the writing process. As you saw in some of those writing samples from earlier this evening, when the student sort of went from using things like good things to some of that more robust vocabulary, this is an exercise and an activity in that structured, sequential, cumulative way that students are doing in order to bolster their written language. Our next principle, synthetic and analytic, is also a really important principle that helps us in both reading and writing. And synthetic talks about progressing from the part to the whole. So it's looking at when a student is reading words, blending individual sounds and syllables and morphemes into the large word. Whereas analytic is really looking at segmenting the sounds and syllables in order to spell words. So going from the whole to its parts. And this process is seen again throughout the day. Here we have a student down below who, using a method called framing your thoughts, has been given a sentence frame in order to build the components of a sentence. So he is starting with the parts and ending with the whole. Up top, you see examples of brain frames. And in the upper school, students are directly and explicitly taught a variety of brain frames. Again, these little components that help feed into how to write an essay, whether that's a sequencing essay, comparing and contrasting essay, or categorizing essay. So again, starting from the parts and building to the whole. And the next slide shows you an example of some of that spelling process in action.
Clam bake.
Clam bake. Clam bake. First syllable clam. C-O-M. C-L-A-M. C-L-A-M. Second syllable bake. B-A-K. the A stands for? B.
So hopefully you saw she broke that word up not only by syllables, but individual sounds before she then wrote the word in her spelling book. And these are strategies, these are tools that, again, can be applied and are applied across the day. Another example of this synthetic and analytic process that is often found in a history class is using report form to digest and break apart more different types of text, expository text, nonfiction text. And we start by directly teaching students this process that first, when you are given that nonfiction article, you're scanning, you're predicting. You're going to read the report. You're going to read the article. You're going to underline the key points by highlighting words that you see that best express the key points in the topic sentence. And you're going to then highlight supporting details or the nuggets, those nuggets. And the next slide shows you here an example. This is a student example. They were reading an article on colonies in North America where they had to find those key details, the gold nuggets or the supporting detail facts. So again, starting with the whole, breaking it into individual pieces. And ultimately, on the next slide, we can see we move students from there to taking split page notes. And the split page note process, this would come far after they've had the experience and the exposure to navigating the nonfiction text. But again, an example here of this principle where we start with the whole, we break it into the individual pieces in order to directly teach that text comprehension. And we're on the second to last principle here, and this is the principle of being cognitive. And this Orton-Gillingham principle helps us remember that we need to engage the learner in an active understanding of what they are learning and why. Our students don't like to be told, because we told you so. They really respond when we can explain the rationale, when we can help them truly understand the reason we are directly teaching what we are teaching. This principle also encourages thinking and reasoning rather than the reliance on rote memorization. And so, for example, in math class, while we are, of course, working on that fact fluency, our priority really is helping students to really develop their thinking, their math thinking, and their math reasoning skills, because that is ultimately what's going to help them continue to succeed in the content. This principle also is guiding us in making sure that students are experiencing a high degree of success. And we do that by offering more project-oriented opportunities. We do that by adjusting our curriculum as needed and reflecting often. And we help students gain confidence as they're building those skills. Effective effort, whoops, sorry, I lost you there, Jen. Effective effort increases that self-esteem, and that is all part of this principle. Sorry, Jen, you can keep going. So just here are some, again, more examples of this principle in action. I will often see students acting out new vocabulary words, whether it's science words or words in ELA or history or even math. The research tells us that students need 8 different exposures to a new vocabulary word before they can truly internalize it and use it themselves. And just telling students that and giving them the why is such an enormous help, because then they don't, when we're repeating and we're using those words continually, they're not going to say, we've already done this. We've already done this. We can now help them understand, nope, we need 8 different exposures. And we try to include these 8 different exposures in a variety of ways, right? So they might be acting out new vocabulary words. They might be playing games, having some fun with the vocab. Really, the point is to engage students in the doing of the skills in order to help them truly learn them. Moving on to our last, oh, and I nearly forgot the learning pit. So part of the cognitive principle, it really helps us in guiding students through this learning pit. And this is a beautiful example created by the fantastic Amy Dempster of our Carroll School Learning Pit. And this process simply shows that when we are learning a new skill, it is in that learning pit where we are challenged. We are in that productive struggle, and we can come out of that productive struggle to find success. It is within that learning pit that cognitive burst really happens. And so this principle of being cognitive, helps remind us that the messiness of the learning pit is where the learning and the growth really happen. And so being explicit with students and helping them see even where they are in this pit in a given task is really powerful. And finally, our last principle that we're going to review here is that of being emotionally sound. And this is a principle that is particularly important because this is the principle that builds confidence. We know that trust between a student and a teacher is essential in order for growth to happen. Students need to feel a sense of safety. They need to feel a sense of confidence, and they need to feel a sense of belonging in order to show that vulnerability, in order to feel like they can take the risk and potentially make a mistake. And this principle, again, is a wonderful reminder that we need to make sure that students are achieving regular success. We need to be making sure that we have entry points for all students to be learning the material and taking those risks. And the next slide, if you click on, here we have just a few more examples. So this first top left picture, we are building trust again using this get ready, do done strategy that you saw in an earlier picture. And this get ready, do done visual is a supportive tool that is supporting this child's executive functioning skills by providing that scaffolding and helping him visualize what the end result will be, how to initiate the task. It's guiding him in making sure he proceeds through the steps he needs to take in order to complete the task. And it's providing that safe, comfortable environment where he can find that success. On the bottom right here, this lower school class is using a really fun multisensory tool to encourage perspective taking when writing. And these cues and reminders are helping students monitor their performance through a task, again, in order to feel that success. And this last image, anytime we can showcase student work to really celebrate their efforts and their achievements, that feeds that trusting relationship and fuels that motivation for them to continue the good work and to continue that hard effort. So those are the principles. Again, that was a pretty broad overview of the principles, and hopefully you saw some examples of how those principles don't just live in an Orton Gillingham tutoring session, but truly are helping us build language instruction throughout the day. And the last bucket, the last reason why our language program is so effective, as I said at the start, is our educators. And we are very fortunate that we can provide a robust professional development opportunity for all of our teachers. I know having half days on Fridays may feel like a sort of a pain sometimes to have to pick your kids up, but it's our opportunity for us to then become the students. And those Friday afternoons are full of a variety of robust professional development opportunities. Every teacher writes a faculty growth plan in consultation with their coach. Every teacher here has a coach who is working with them to build lessons, understand student profiles, set goals. We're fortunate to be able to offer collaboration time. So teaching teams are working together. So that language instruction, those threads are happening across students' day because the teaching team is able to come together and develop action plans for each and every student. This is happening in our team time, in our department time, in the professional learning communities that gather, that are cross sections of the adults of the school. And what you can see here is this image is showcasing our faculty growth plans this year are making sure that we are actively, again, using that data to inspire our instruction and our practices. Our faculty growth plan is supporting teachers in setting goals related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, really making sure that every student feels that sense of belonging so that they can learn in an environment where they can thrive. We are working on developing ed tech skills and helping teaching teams develop goals together. So there's that collaborative inquiry that's happening. And of course, all of this is really rooted in our commitment to whole child. And so all the pieces of your children are being considered when we're developing these plans with the ultimate goal of helping them become the most skilled readers and writers. Well, I have just done a lot of talking at you. My preference in these types of events is to have more of a conversation and to be able to field questions and stop when things seem confusing. So I do hope that, Stacy, we do have time maybe for a few questions.
A few quick questions. The Thursday update mentioned that this ends at 8:30. Typically we end at 8 o'clock. And Allison, I'm going to state a few questions and I'm going to partially answer them as well, just to give you a little water break over there. We had a question around where can parents access this data? And I would say that if you are a new parent or a prospective parent, there's very limited data at that time. The student that Allison was illustrating had been with us since third grade. So there's an amalgamation of data and there's a longer runway to take a look at. However, at any point you can request a data meeting from your teachers. They can set it up for you at a middle school, lower school, or upper school. Again, it's probably better to wait at least until your second year so that we have more data points. It's difficult to see the trend lines after just 1 year. We also had a question related to targeted cognitive intervention. You spoke about reaction time and processing speed, and those reports actually come from our cognitive intervention program, which someone asked the question around our partnership with MIT. And that's a computer-based intervention that happens for all of our students in grades 4 through 9th that works on working memory, processing speed, reaction time, and executive function. And Allison, I'm going to throw you a question here, which is that why does reaction time matter?
That's a good one. So reaction time is the process where what we're measuring is how quickly and accurately a child is responding to visual information. And when you think about reading, the funny thing about reading is our brains actually are not naturally wired to do it. We were not born to read. We were born to communicate with oral language, but reading is an invention. And letters actually don't have meaning. They're squiggles on a page. Whereas numbers, if you see a number 2, you can visualize 2 of something. There's an inherent meaning in numbers. Letters have no meaning. They are squiggles on a page. And so reaction time is so important to oral reading fluency because it's helping us understand the pathway that of how well a student is able to respond to how quickly and accurately that visual information. And that ties directly to how quickly and rapidly a student is able to look at those squiggles on a page, those circles in a line, and decide, is it a B? Is it a D? Is it a P? Is it a Q? And that cognitive pathway that we're looking at for the reaction time is the pathway that is accessed with those squiggles on a page.
Thank you.
Great question.
We also had a question around what can parents do at home to support, and just kind of picking up on a couple of the principles that you said, this idea of productive struggle, right? And the learning pit, the understanding that actually I'm a parent who doesn't like to see my child struggle, but that part of productive struggle is actually learning to do it on your own.
Yeah.
This idea of modeling that we do a lot at Carroll, right? Like we sort of have to demonstrate first. And the paradigm that you explain around gradual release, which is that we're going to model, then we're going to do it together, and then we're going to hand it off, also works very well for parents.
Yep.
And then thinking about things from part to whole, as you talked about, breaking things down into smaller chunks. Just to say, we are actually in January going to have an executive function expert on. We have many of them at Carroll, but we're actually bringing in an outside expert, Dr. Sharon Celine, who spoke to our faculty and staff during opening weeks, and she'll be with us for a parent talk as well. But Allison, any other parent strategies that I hadn't mentioned?
Yeah. So and I'm a parent too, and let me tell you, as great as I am at helping your children with the productive struggle in the learning pit, I have empathy for when it's happening in my house. I'm the same. I think what's tricky about helping children when they are in that learning pit is we're also looking for something called the zone of proximal development, and that is something that is a gift of our Carroll educators, is they know how to design instruction that places students at an entry point where they can struggle in that zone of proximal development. Sometimes at home, that zone is somewhere out in left field. What I will say, as far as, what can you be doing at home? Many of our students struggle with working memory capacity. And students who struggle with auditory working memory capacity tend to not have the internal dialogue that is guiding them in knowing what to do next, or what is coming up next, or how to start a task. And the best thing as parents that we can do is externalize that internal dialogue. We can model by talking through a process. If you're giving instructions to your child to do something, really limit the number of words that you're using to give those instructions. Ask for students to repeat it back. Again, thinking about like part to whole, whole to part, many of our students also don't naturally think in categories. In fact, if you are getting ready to go grocery shopping, maybe bring your child along and have them keep track of the list and see if they actually can categorize those items according to aisle. You may have to directly and explicitly teach your child that. I'm willing to bet there are some children who are not aware that the grocery store is actually categorized in aisles. So the more that you can help model by talking aloud and being really direct and explicit in how the world is organized, those are really great strategies.
Thank you. So I'll answer one final question, and then I'm gonna let everybody go and have their Thursday night. We had a question around, we showed a lot of data up there, but what measures do we use to track actual reading and math skills? We've talked about a lot of the discrete skills. Allison, do you want to just take 30 seconds to talk about Track My Progress?
Oh, 30 seconds. I will do my best. I will do my best. Yes, so Track My Progress. And I'm sure math is on the agenda for another speaker series.
It's actually our next talk in December. Thank you.
Yeah, so I will just comment about the reading portion of Track My Progress. But so Track My Progress, it is a nationally normed tool. It is based on Common Core standards. And although Massachusetts uses Massachusetts state frameworks, what you should know is that Mass frameworks and Common Core standards are practically identical. And so we do Track My Progress 3 times a year, fall, winter, spring, and that helps us gain a better understanding of where a child sits relative to nationwide peers when it comes to English language arts skills. And part of that includes reading comprehension for both literature and nonfiction text.
Thank you.
That was more than 30 seconds,
So
sorry.
that was great. Allison, thank you so much. You were fantastic. There was actually a lot of parent feedback about how informative and wonderful this was. To all of you who joined us, thank you so much. We so appreciate you taking the time. If you're watching this on a recording and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We have an email, parentquestions with an S, parentquestions@carrollschool.org. We're happy to be helpful, and have a wonderful Thursday night and happy almost weekend, everyone. Allison, thank you again.
Thank you all so much.